Hey, welcome to Fred Talk, inspiration and truth from a friend. Today, I want to talk to you about the money side of business. I do a lot of coaching of business owners, and they always ask me, how do you figure out your budget? How do you price things in your company? And I've owned a painting company for 8 years that I built. I have a coaching organization. I've planted a church. I've led lots of organizations, and there's some principles that I have functioned by pretty much in every organization that I have led. And when it comes to money, the most important thing with building a business is having margin. Most important thing. Because you're always going to have difficult times or seasons where you have to weather through it. And most companies that don't have margin can't make it through those periods of times. The statistics of startups is not very good. After a year, 90% of startups fail. Not very good stats. Most of them don't ever have the money to make it. And when you're tight and you need money, you get pressured and you don't think well and you don't respond well and you don't come off well with selling things. You become pushy, needy, and that doesn't go well. That's why margin is so important in building a business. And then after the year, the 10% that make it, 5 years later, 90% of those companies aren't existing. Because the reality is, as you go through year 2 and 3 and you're building something, you're going to have some setbacks. You're going to have something that doesn't go well with the product, or you're going to have a client situation that's difficult, or something you didn't foresee, or you're going to invest in something that doesn't work out. And if you don't have margin, then you can't weather those kinds of times. So when you build a company, you always want to think about what is going to help the company last instead of what's in it for me as the business owner. And if you have that mindset first, you're going to get blessed way more on the back end rather than just taking a bunch of money now and hurting the company in the long run. So let me give you a budgeting principle that I have always functioned by. I call it the 10-10-10-70. And so let me show you what it looks like. So in the 10-10-10-70 of your revenue, you got 100% of your revenue, and the first 10% I've always tithed. So whether you are spiritually minded or not, giving back and honoring God with what you're given, there are promises that come with it. See, whether you think God is a part of anything or not, the reality is all of the gifts and talents we have, all the opportunities, everything that's going on, God's the source behind all that. So whether you give him credit or not, he is. And so once you come to the realization in life that it's bigger than me, and you realize that I need to give back, then you really understand how the world functions and the way God designed the world to function. And so I give the first 10% to my local church that I'm involved in because I want the goodness of God to be seen in the world. So, and there's promises. In fact, in the Old Testament book of Malachi, it says that the people were complaining to God because they were getting their money, and then they said our purses like have holes in them because we don't have enough money after we spend, have to buy everything. And God replies to him and says, well, the reason you don't is because you're under a curse, because you're cheating me. You're not giving me my tithe. God asked for the first portion of what we get to show whether our heart really does honor God and whether we really do trust him. And so when you tithe, it's a way to give back and show that you honor God. And God said this to the people. He said, give me my full tithe, bring it into my storehouse, into the church, and watch, test me on this. I will take care of your crops and I will provide and I will protect for you. Now, that was back in the day when agriculture was the main business. So their crops were the important thing that he was protecting. So what's he protect today? He protects our finances. He protects our investments. Um, God works in supernatural ways when we trust him. And it's like the tithe gives an umbrella of protection on our life. And what I've experienced is the level that I give is the level that God blesses me with, because he knows if I'm able to give back, then he knows what I'm going to do with it. And he's going to bless me and use me as a channel to be a river rather than me just holding it all like a pond. So then the next 10%, I do savings. This is for margin. So that 10% savings is what gives you margin to pay your employees, or if you have 1099 people, or you're just paying your expenses, and it allows you to have a little bit of flex in your budget, your checking account during the month. And so if every time you make money, 10% of it goes to savings, you're going to build up a reserve of 5,000, 10,000. If the company grows significant, it could be 50,000, 100,000, whatever, where then you're going to have margin for your operating expenses. And that happens in every business where you've got to pay something before you get paid. Or you need to pay your employees and there's certain things that haven't come in yet. So that happens. Saving allows you to have that. And then it allows you to have that cushion if times get tough and you've got 10, 15 grand sitting there, or 50,000 sitting there, and times are really hard. You can get through a lean time of 6 months or a year or 3 months and be able to cover some things to make it through so that you can be strong after getting through that season. So saving, margin. And then the last 10% is reinvest. And this is R&D. Great companies always have research and development. They always are ready for new opportunities to test them out and see if they're going to work or help them take a next step. And if you don't plan for that, you don't set aside money, then you can't take advantage of an opportunity that comes your way. When I was growing my painting business, originally, I didn't want to get into spraying because I didn't feel like I had the right people to make sure it was done right. And then I got to the point where I was ready for it. And sprayers are like $800 for a really nice sprayer. And I bought 2 or 3 of them. So I dropped a couple grand on sprayers because I had reinvestment money in there. I knew it was there. And then some jobs that we were going to be able to start to moving into, we did. And it opened up a whole new revenue stream for us. Another thing I've used this reinvestment for is to reinvest in my team. I'll give bonuses at the end of the year for Christmas. I'll take team lead people out skiing to Colorado just to have fun and appreciate them and just do things for people to reinvest in them. And that builds loyalty with your team. So reinvesting allows you to have a strong team, and it allows you to also position yourself to maybe do an advertisement or try a new product line or something down the road. Then you live on 70% as the owner. So of the profit margin that you make, 70% of it is what you take as your salary. But you first invest in the company. You trust God, you thank him, you give by giving back, you save for margin, and then you reinvest for the future. And this positions your company to where the company is first and the organization gets built strong, and then you live on the 70%. Now, one of the other things that's important is to figure out what your profit margins are going to be. And so this 70%, so of your revenue, after you pay all of your expenses, pay, your team, pay your insurance, pay your product things, your advertising, your financial person, all the people that you're paying, then what's left over is your profit margin. So let's say that you want your profit margin in your company to be 30%. Okay. So that's what we want for our profit margin. It's 30%. So of that 30%, here's the way I have always broken it down to help me in the beginning realize what I'm making my money from. All right. The roles I'm playing, because this helps position you to later be able to expand your company and step out of some of the day-to-day operations. So let's say that I am getting a 30% margin. 10% of that is as the owner. So you're worth that. You're worth 10% of the income you make is because you put your name on the line. It's your credit on the line. You're the one that's put the sweat equity into it. So about 10% is your ownership amount. Sometimes if your margin goes up and let's say it's 35, maybe it's 15%, 10 to 15% ownership. Then the next 10% is for operations, for running it, for coordinating and handling the schedule, building teams and organizing your company. So I've always felt like 10% of the margin that's there goes to operations. And if I'm running the operations, then I take that 10%. And then the last 10% is for sales. Who's driving the growth? Who's getting business? Who's helping us to be able to have work? Well, they need to be paid. And if I'm doing all the sales, then I need to have that. So when I started my business, I set this out as the way I was going to do it. And I knew that my 30 to 35% margin that I'm making from the company goes to my ownership, my operations, and my sales. Now, as it's gone along, I have gotten other people to handle operations. So that money goes to someone else. And so then my profit margin part is 20 to 25% because someone else is doing the day-to-day operations. But that allows me to do a better job on sales and moving it forward so that I can hopefully multiply it and my income actually goes up because I'm spending less time working in the business and I'm working on the business. Then I've had times where I am not doing all the sales. I have some people that do sales. So now that means I'm taking a little less there. So now I'm at 10 to 15% as the owner of the margin. Okay. And again, at this point, you've got multiple people working for you in leadership roles. They're generating things. So it's not just one person doing it. So you should be able to multiply yourself. So this 10%, even though it's less, if you're doing 3 times as much work, you're still making the same amount of income. Does that make sense? So, so how do we price things? Now, let's talk about that. So let me flip here and I have some room for writing. So let's, here's what you've got to do is you've got to decide how much you want to make. Okay. So let's say you want to make 5,000 a month. I'm sorry, a week. Okay. You want to make 5,000 a week. All right. So that's 20,000 a month. All right. So then what you do is you work backwards on that. And so as you look at your jobs and let's say you're doing, let's say a job's 10,000 and you're doing 4 of those jobs a month. So you're doing 40,000 in revenue. Okay. And your profit margin is 30%. So 30% of 4,000 is $12,000. Okay. So you're somewhere in between where you want to be on your monthly income, $12,000. So if the job is 10,000, then that means that each $10,000 job, 3,000 of it is your profit margin. Okay. Your margin of profit. All right. So that means 7,000 of it goes to all the operational costs on it. So Most likely on a $10,000 job, if you're in a service industry, you're going to be paying about 50% of that is going to go to labor. Okay. So about 50%. And then your supplies are going to usually make up anywhere from 10 to 15%, depending on the kind of field that you're in. So somewhere 1,000, 1,500. So sometimes if the supplies are more, maybe the labor's a little less. And then you're going to have about another 10% in administration cost. All right. So this is paying your bookkeeper, it's paying your advertising, your bills that you have for the company, your insurance, and those kinds of things. So, that's going to make up your 7,000, and then you're going to have your profit after that. Now, here's what I've learned along the way is when you work in your company. So if you are doing the role of operations and sales and service, whatever it is you're doing, if you're working in the company, okay, I am in the company, you're going to make less money per hour because your amount of money you can make is limited to this pot right here, this 50%. Okay. And that's based on time. So that's going to tell you how much you're going to pay people per hour. And then part of that's going to go to the labor, the hourly charge you give. Part of it's going to go to supplies, part administration, and part to the profit of the company. But if you're working in the company, you can't take more than what this 50% of the labor part. Does that make sense? If you're working on the company and you're not doing the service, okay, you're doing sales, and especially if you're not doing operations, then you will make more money per hour because that 10% cut that you're making on selling, you're not doing any of the labor work. And that sale might take you, I don't know, anywhere from 2 to 5 hours of work. And you're going to get 10% of that. You're going to make $1,000. And you worked anywhere from 2 to 3 to 5 hours. You're making anywhere from 500 an hour to at the minimum a couple $100 an hour. So if you spend your time and energy driving lots of sales and getting a ton of sales, then you're going to make more money. And as a business owner, you got to be able to sell. You have to be one of the best salesmen because nobody else cares about the company as much as you do. And so you have to believe in it, own it, and drive sales. So if you have to stay on the front end of the company, if you don't, things don't go well. But then you have to make sure that you do have strong operations on the back end also. Because if you don't and you get a bunch of sales, then your profit margins go down. And I've had times where I wasn't real on top of the operations of how it was going. And instead of my margins, being 30 to 35%, I've had them as low as 20 to 25%. And now I'm making a lot less money. So you have to keep tabs on making sure revenue is coming in from sales. And often that's you driving it. And then your operations, you have to make sure those people are running things well, be on top of things, check and see how they're working with clients and with the team. So that's just a little bit of a breakdown for you on how to budget, how to price things. And those are principles, those are percentages. And I would highly encourage you to set that from the beginning. Some people say, well, I'm not going to take any income until I get to a certain place. But the problem is then you're not saving any money. You're not reinvesting any money. You're not creating margin for the company. And you're giving all this sacrifice and you're not taking anything. And eventually that starts to wear on you. And so you're paying all these other people. And so you need to be able to take an income as quickly as you can. Yes, in the beginning, often you have to put some money into it And you might have a few months where you're not getting any revenue and you're just pouring into it, planting a bunch of seeds. But very quickly, within a few months, you really need to be able to start taking some revenue, and that gives you a little model of how to break down those percentages for you as a company. All right. Well, I hope you found that helpful. And remember, my name's Fred, and I'm your friend.